Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great day so far. We're going to dive into the latest in the world of Star Wars news, and of course, take your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss this week about Star Wars or otherwise. This is a live Q&A, so you can ask anything you want. Ask anything that you would like to know our opinion or thoughts on, and we will discuss it here on tonight's stream. Should be a little bit more fan-friendly stream tonight, as we usually cover the 2 or 3 most popular stories of the week in the world of Star Wars. And to the benefit, I guess, of us as Star Wars fans, we finally had some news in the last month or so. A lot of stuff, pretty much every week, we've had some type of story that has kind of dominated the conversation of each stream. Last week, it was the Maul Shadow Lord trailer. We had the Kathleen Kennedy retirement to talk about. We've had so much stuff in the world of Star Wars that there hasn't been as much time for fan questions. So we're excited to get back to a little bit more fan-centric stream tonight. But we do have some big news in the world of corporate Star Wars, I should say, around Disney finally naming a successor to Bob Iger. This will be obviously the second successor he has had in his tenure as Disney CEO. But he came back, I believe it was in 2022, the end of 2022, to help the company get back on track after Bob Chapek's reign mixed with COVID kind of ruining the movie industry as a whole and the entertainment industry and really changing the outlook. And he has been there since. And I think originally he was supposed to be there for about a year until they figured out where to go in the future. And he has been there since the end of 2022. He will be stepping down here in the coming months. And Josh D'Amaro, the chairman of Disney Parks and Experiences, is going to be taking over for him. So we'll talk about what that means for Star Wars. We'll talk about what that means for Disney as a whole and all the changes and things we're seeing coming from leadership currently around Disney and the Star Wars property. So we're going to talk about that. That is by far our biggest story. We have a handful of other little pieces of news and tidbits of information, including talking about how Galactic Racer has been confirmed to have pod racing, considering it didn't show any pod racers in the trailer. It just showed Sebulba as a character, but no pod racing. It has been confirmed to have pod racing and arcade style racing and customization with pod racers. So that to me is a huge plus overall for my excitement towards this game, because I didn't have that much interest in racing around in a land speeder or something. It's pod racers. That's the core of Star Wars racing. It's what we all kind of have wanted for years, is a modern pod racer Star Wars game. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, make sure you hit the like button. It really does help out our channel. Subscribe if you're new, if you're watching on replay, or if you're joining us live for the first time. We do this every week, every Tuesday, and we take your guys' questions. So make sure you join us, and you can send in anything you want to ask us for each stream. All right, let's get into the big news. Like I said, it's going to be the fact that Disney has finally named a successor to Bob Iger to be the company's CEO later this year. The board has announced that Josh D'Amaro, the current chairman of Disney Parks and Experiences, will succeed Bob Iger. On top of that, Dana Walden, the current TV chief and thought to be runner-up, was named president and chief creative officer. The two will start in their new job on March 18th, 2026, the day of the company's annual shareholder meeting. That day, D'Amaro will also be named to the company's board. Iger will continue to serve as senior advisor and member of the Disney board until his full retirement from the company, December 31st, 2026, the company added in their announcement. Josh D'Amaro has been considered the frontrunner for a while. Bloomberg reported on February 1st that he was considered to being close to being announced, but the sentiment across Hollywood has been for a while that he would prevail over his supposed rival, Dana Walden, co-chairperson of Disney Entertainment. Disney named James Gorman chairman in late 2024 with the purpose that he would lead a search committee for the next CEO to avoid the embarrassment of what happened the first time Iger stepped down. Gorman had previously overseen the succession at Morgan Stanley, where the runner-up to CEO position also got a promotion within the company. So that is what we have from the succession plan for the Walt Disney Company. Josh D'Amaro did release a statement and said, "I am immensely grateful to the board for entrusting me with leadership of the company that means so much to me and millions around the world. Disney's strength has always come from our people and the creative excellence that defines our stories and experiences. There's no limit to what Disney can achieve, and I'm excited to work with our team across the company and brilliant creative partners to honor Disney's remarkable legacy while continuing to innovate, grow, and deliver exceptional value for our consumers and shareholders. I also want to express my gratitude to Bob Iger for his generous mentorship, his friendship, and the profound impact of his leadership. So there we have it. The succession we've been kind of anticipating. This one for us Star Wars fans, a little less so than who was going to succeed Kathleen Kennedy. But since that story had kind of run its course by the middle of the year and it seemed fairly played out, this seemed to be the next big domino to fall within the Walt Disney Company. And a lot of us had kind of forgotten the fact that Bob Iger was intending to step away for so many years. I mean, this was, I believe he signed at least one, if not two extensions since 2022 when he came back because he was supposed to be temporary. And there was so much change that he has been there for so long. Obviously, the last time Disney changed CEO didn't go very well. A lot of that could be placed at the feet of the way Bob Chapek altered and kind of changed the company and the way creative pieces of the company were pulled out in favor of the more analytics and business driven decisions, especially with the philosophy of Disney for Disney Plus that completely changed with the onset of COVID and how almost everything that Disney made from every version of the company, from Disney to animation to Pixar to Star Wars to Marvel, all had to go through a board to decide whether they were going to put it in theaters or on Disney Plus. That was dismantled once Bob Iger got back. Now, though, we have another parks person jumping in, and a lot of the stuff with JPEG, obviously, he went through a almost unprecedented time for a major company like this, especially an entertainment company whose lifeblood really is in the parks, and most of the money they make is in theme parks. When you have no theme parks open, no studios open, no movies coming out in theaters, the company had to really take dramatic actions. And so while JPEG's decisions might have harmed them long term, unknowing in hindsight, I guess, not knowing what was going on at the time, it was a pretty dramatic time to change leadership and a brutal time to take really office for the first time with his role. I think with Josh Tomorrow now having seen that succession plan fail, now having seen what it takes to be a successor to Bob Iger and having seen what the post-COVID outlook looks like, having the ability of hindsight to having seen all the failures and all the successes post-COVID, I would imagine this is a lot more seamless transition than the last one was, assuming we don't have another pandemic on the horizon here in the future.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Chapek definitely stepped into a position that all the CEOs, all the studios, every industry was just kind of thrown off by. Some are obviously a lot more pre-configured to be able to handle something, but not many companies are so multi-corporate, multi-global as Disney is. And yeah, I mean, I don't fault Chapek for some things that were out of his hand. I do fault him for devaluing a lot of, like, the movies that came out in the era, like, The Board, what might have been a good idea for, like, that first year or so when things were just really happening, but he kinda started using it as, like, a de facto, which to me just never made sense. And I mean, it's besides Inside Out too, it basically destroyed Pixar for a while. Even the quality movies that were getting, like Soul and all that, never got a real chance against Turning Red and all. And I know that they've had a couple small releases here and there, but it just seems like we've lost like a good 5, 6 years of, like, solid Pixar films, and then the ones that people did pay attention to as the pandemic was closing, as people's opportunity to get outside was opening them up more and more, were kind of like, not B tier, but more of their developing directors, more of their directors that were supposed to be handling more of the mid-range budgets and just having a chance to be alongside, like, their Pete Doctors, for example, and that was just a shame. And to ruin Pixar, which has been such a mainstay since 2000, right? And it has been was on unstoppable run basically until COVID. Yeah, I mean, whoever, Josh Tomorrow is when it comes to the entertainment visual side of things, that's gonna be a huge challenge for him, just as much as it's gonna be a huge challenge to see oversee this IP of Star Wars, like, actually get back in theaters and stay in theaters. It was nice to have the break. It was nice that Mandalorian was a big streaming show that blew up into a different stratosphere, that spawned so many cool shows and all that, even if you loved or hated them. It did directly lead to stuff like Andor, it did directly lead to stuff like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the revival of Clone Wars and all that. That stuff was cool, right? And doubling down on it for a while was smart. But the fact that by the time in May, once we had Mandalorian Grogu, it'll have been nearly 7 years since we got another Star Wars movie in theaters when Iger was pushing, like, almost year after year after year with spin-offs in between the main saga films at one point as a mandate. It was such a abrupt halt, so he's got another thing there. I know, we've got Dave Filoni and co, like, now helping to step in for Kathleen Kennedy, but now there's also a new CEO on top, so there's gonna be a lot of communication there for sure with this brand, and the cherry on top, the MCU, you gotta make Doomsday work, and I'm sure that in some way he has already been involved with that, because this is not just something that Iger woke up one day and is like, "Yep, Josh, I think you won today," right? It's like there's definitely some things that are happening here. And presumably, once Doomsday comes out, Josh will be the one who is the public face of the company, who will be hopefully leading the charge towards like a very strong Avengers movie, critically and commercially, right? Got to get your IPs in line, and that's a huge thing. But it's also nice to know that this is a guy that already has that reputation of being pretty friendly, pretty outgoing, has a true love for the Disney parks and all, and obviously come for the park. And that's just such a nice change to the whiplash of Chapek, who most famously was known as the straight to VHS, straight to DVD inventor of sorts for all these Disney golden animation era films. And while that might have worked here and there, putting that same mentality towards streaming and making it so, like, flooded and reducing the quality because you're pumping out quantity was already a big mistake enough, but then you have the Disney parks where he was just raising prices, reducing hours, just reducing the little perks and everything, and you mess up with the parks, you're messing up with the cash cow of Disney, and yeah, I mean, once we started hearing about that, I had a feeling he was gonna be gone pretty quickly. I didn't expect Iger to have to step in, and I don't think Iger did either, but maybe just the fact that Disney for a while now has had, like, some pretty long-running CEOs for this to have gone so south so quickly just necessitated Iger stepping in just for the sense of familiarity and just nice control for a bit, but this is a chance now, really for all of Disney, for Star Wars, for a reinvigorated Feige without having to have so many MCU connections on the streaming side, for the parks, for Pixar, hopefully, to really have a new ownership of everything that is to come out of Disney, so I hope for the best, right? I hope for theatrical, as it's been proven, is still the way to go, especially to make your money back now that we've burst the streaming bubble of just hoping subscribers will be enough. At some point, that market share is just gonna be cannibalizing itself, so you can't just ignore a whole other media and say, like, everything is the Netflix style rollout, when even Netflix is now having their CEO to Washington, DC, to our Capitol in front of a panel of judges and is committing and vowing to 45 days at minimum for movies, especially after this, Warner Brothers acquisition. So everybody's trying to go back to theaters. Now it's just a matter of being smart about being in theaters, and that's gonna be the real big challenge. But I think what'll help every part of Disney, especially with Josh at the head, is that it'll be like a reinvigorated, refreshed group. It won't be the same faces, the same people that we've seen for like 15-ish years, right? At some point, you gotta let the younger generation come through, and I think this is a chance to say Disney and kinda go away from its staleness, kinda go away from playing too many things safe, too many live action films of always Disney Golden Age and stuff. Maybe we get to see a revitalization of not just the IPs, but maybe also their proper live action filmmaking. So, all that stuff, that's what I hope for, and I think that's why, I'm only gonna be positive about Josh at this initial time just because it's necessary, and this was always gonna be the plan.
Yeah, it was always going to be the plan to have somebody associated with parks to be the successor. Again, that is for all the Disney IPs we love. that is the lifeblood of the company. Parks makes them the money. That's what supports almost everything else they do. What in turn refreshes the parks are the films, and they've seemed to have found, especially post COVID, for better or worse, a very much so reliant codependency between parks and film. We're starting to see it now with Galaxy's Edge, the big changes there coming, and the reliance on what is popular and what do people love, what is timeless, and how can we utilize these things to bring a sense of joy and excitement to people within the parks that they'll want to come to the parks to see a new experience related to those films, right? That's been always something that's been a push and pull for Disney Parks fans, and I count myself very much so among Disney Parks fans. And one of the big complaints over the years, starting with Chapek's leadership as the head of parks and resorts into obviously now Josh Tomorrow, has been the continued cut down of just the small things. They've continually gotten rid of live entertainment. They've continually gotten rid of the free stuff in favor of premiumizing it and in favor of putting their money into experiences that will draw crowds rather than making Disneyland, for example, because that's the park I go to the most, an enjoyable experience. One of the reasons the Disney parks have been such a premium over the years has been all the extras that you get, the vibe, the experience they create by giving you stuff for free that you're not necessarily going to think about while you're there. But as you leave, that's what separates a Disney park from another theme park. They've continually gotten rid of that stuff over the years. And so that's frustrating. And Josh Tomorrow has been part of that as well. I just don't necessarily blame it on him because we've seen this direction start over 10 years ago and it's just continued throughout the company. He's just yet the next person to follow whatever their company philosophy has been when it's come to parks and resorts. And he hasn't been head of parks and resorts that long because he replaced Chapek. So it's only been about 5 years that he's been head of parks and resorts, and we haven't seen too much come from parks and resorts in that time, especially in California. A lot of the work has been in Disney World, and from what I've heard, I haven't been there in over a decade, but from what I've heard, people have enjoyed a lot of the stuff there, even though they did cut some things that people weren't happy with. But overall, I do think it's going to be a pretty seamless transition for Star Wars specifically. There is not a coincidence that Kathleen Kennedy steps down in the same within a month, basically, of announcing the CEO change at Disney. All of this stuff has been planned. All of this stuff has been set up so that it should have a more seamless flow into the next generation of people and figureheads at Disney. So I'm sure for years they've been setting up Josh Tomorrow to become the CEO. They've been setting up Dave Filoni and Lenwyn Brennan to become the presidents of Lucasfilm. And when Kevin Feige steps away, I'm sure they already have people they're trying to set up to be the president of Marvel when he eventually does one day as well. So I think they've learned from this kind of wing it succession plan. Again, I mean, the movie industry has changed so much in the last 5 years since 2019. But in 2019, we forget how bulletproof the movie industry was at that time, and especially Disney. Theatrical was at its peak. Nothing was touching anything in the world of theatrical, and streaming was on the rise. There were so many opportunities. It was such a bright time for the industry. And then everything came to a grinding halt, and it's had to rediscover itself, and it will still rediscover itself. But I think at least for parks and at least for the film industry, there's a direction for the first time in years. And I think you can finally see where Disney itself as a company, Lucasfilm as a company, where all these companies, subdivisions, where they're all going. And I think we finally have a path and a plan and like kind of a direction out of the remains of what COVID was and what the pre-COVID plans were that they tried to scrap together after COVID hit. And so we're finally starting to see all that. And I think this will be kind of the culmination, but by no means do I think they just decided this, yesterday or 3 weeks ago. This has been something they've been planning for years, probably since about 6 months after Bob Iger took back control of Disney within 2023. So I would be shocked if they haven't had this plan long term. And everybody's kind of just been auditioning for those jobs since then because he always was coming back purely as a band-aid, purely to help get the company back to where it was rather than to, stay. He didn't want to stay. There was a reason he retired. And I think he's sticking around on the board, which is what he did when Chapek took over. This time he's sticking around for a year, or I guess about 8 months, before he stuck around for a full year after Chapek left, and it ended up being kind of one of the reasons why there was so much tension there because of the fact that Bob Iger is the president of the board. He's had more power really than anybody else at Disney in years and decades because he's the president of the board and the CEO. So his fingerprints will be on everything they do and all the stuff they make, all the decisions they make moving forward. So I like the fact that this is kind of seemingly a unified thing within the company. Whether, things change for good or change for bad remains to be seen, but as a whole, you want to see a seamless succession plan and kind of feel like you're almost not even missing the previous administration and just feel like the same experience that you're expecting it always to be. So we'll see moving forward. Kevin Davis says Josh D'Amaro and Dana Walden going forward will focus on theatrical and streaming, WWE and NFL going to make money for Disney. Theme parks always make money. Yeah, and theme parks, I mean, it's ridiculous now, and I'll be on record on how ridiculous the prices are. It's insane what they're doing, and they keep raising it over and over again, and people keep paying it. It's really, it's hard to blame a company for raising prices. It's really on us as consumers to not go, right? To say this is too much, we're not going. But people don't want to miss out. We live in this kind of FOMO world now where everybody wants to be a part of these experiences. They're willing to spend all their money to go to Disneyland for a day. If people stopped spending, we would have the prices flatten, but people just keep going. We keep getting record attendance no matter how much the prices are. Um, but yeah, the parks will make money. They keep increasing the prices every single year, and people still go. And then Kevin says Netflix need more IPs. That's why they acquired Warner Brothers. Yeah, definitely. And then Pixar has Toy Story 5. Disney has Frozen 3. Those will make money at the box office. The original films, such as Hopper, Hext, people will wait until they come out on Disney Plus. I don't think that's a guarantee because we have seen some original things work for Disney. I think Hoppers is probably going to, unless it's great, be a mid-tier, maybe make its money back movie for Disney. They're dropping it in the springtime, which hasn't necessarily been a hugely successful time for animation. But I imagine that Thanksgiving weekend, with Hext, it will have a shot to be a big money maker. But it is unfortunate that kind of the only things we have seen make tons of money from Disney and Pixar since COVID have been the sequels. But on the flip side, they haven't made good original movies. Like Wish was terrible. Strange World was one of the most forgettable animated movies I've seen. They haven't made anything good when it's come to the original stuff. All their good movies have been the sequels, right? So remains to be seen where the interest in original animation is for Disney and Pixar. Maybe they'll take the wrong lessons from that and still continue to make sequels. And we know there are tons more sequels on the docket, right? They announced Incredibles 3. They've announced multiple sequels, and they are waiting to slowly, eventually announce Zootopia 3, and it will come out faster than Zootopia 2 did, right? So we'll get more sequels, but I do hope that if Hext is good, we start to see a return to original stuff because we had a nice little decade there in the 2010s of tons of original Disney movies, and all of them, for the most part, being really good to great. A lot of them becoming classics like Tangled, Moana, Princess and the Frog, Frozen, Big Hero 6. All of those were between 2009 and 2019, and hopefully we do get back to that soon.
To your point about Hoppers specifically, the projections for that are actually quite good. Like, a lot of these Pixar, Walt Disney Animation films have been opening up recently despite their quality to, like, 2030. Projections are already for opening weekend, like, 40-ish, 50, which is pretty crazy, but I don't know, there's something about the trailer and the concept of it. It kinda captured even my imagination a little bit. I've definitely noticed people, like, always kinda laughing during that trailer, anytime it comes on in theaters. So I think there's a chance that one will do pretty good. Hext is the one that I'm like, idea-wise, I'm not sure how much that will sell itself, right? Definitely need to see much, much more of it and the direction they're going for, how it sounds, how it feels. But Hopper, I think that one has a chance. There's something just very silly and crazy about not just, like, taking over, like, a beaver's body, but also, like, crazy, like, capitalist uprising sort of messaging and all that. It's just weird. It's got that, like, audacity to it that I think has been missing a little bit in some of these starting films, right? I don't think they make this and just hope that it's one and done. I don't think that's how Walt Disney Animation Studios has worked since, like, Frozen onwards, but I think this one, regardless of how it does, I think it'll be something that I will be cherished just from the way people have been reacting to it online and all of that, and just, seeing a bunch of animals animated running around terrorizing humans is definitely a sell to anybody, regardless of where you are in the world. So I think that one's got a good chance. Text, I'm not quite sure, but yeah, the idea of, like, breaking down how people have been so primed and trained, especially people who've had their kids during COVID, who are now coming of age, closer to preteen, early teens age, right? Like, okay, how do you, like, make sure that these kids don't wanna be like, "Oh, I'll just wait 3 months." Maybe that you have to get them through their social media. Maybe you have to get them through smart, features in theaters, right? Like having sing-alongs from week 2 and whatnot for a lot of these more musically oriented films, right? I just this idea that because things haven't gone right so far, that Disney is not gonna be able to turn around. I don't believe that. I mean, this is an industry-wide thing that streaming has kinda taken over, but even the average person now is starting to realize, like, "Oh, I'm not gonna have 3 Star Wars shows every year. I'm not gonna have 2 MCU shows." Now that, like, the actual timeline of things are starting to play out, I think people are starting to notice that, and even animation, even if it is theoretically gonna get a bigger push on Disney Plus and on streaming, it's not necessarily gonna be movies that are gonna be hitting that. Like, I think people were excited for a Moana series after how often that thing would break Disney's streaming record month after month, and then Moana 2 is the end result that they chose to make it a movie, patching it together even if it wasn't ideal, and it made $1 billion. So they know that that's gonna work, that there is still an audience, and I think we just the type of media that we'll start seeing kind of replace it will be more TV specific, more like spin-offs as intended of these movies that feel like, "Oh, I'm in the universe, but I don't feel like I need to know that or it's connective glue between films and all." So I'm not super worried about it. To your point though about like IPs from Netflix now they have Warner Brothers and all that. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely gonna change things, right? Like you can even see in the park side of things, Universal has had a huge success with the Mario world, and now that Super Mario Galaxy movie is coming out, it's like, oh, now you're taking a beloved modern classic of Mario and adapting that as your sequel. Hopefully, you're improving the script a little bit more to not simply just do well in the box office, but do well in the box office and critically. You're seeing people opt for like anime films like Demon Slayer and all that. And I don't know if it's Demon Slayer specifically or some other anime studios, but Studio Ghibli has their own park. A couple other studios in Japan are trying to make theirs. It's becoming a thing, like Liam was mentioning, that there is so much synergy slash dependency on movies for the parks, however you want to look at it. But if the only way you're gonna people to come to your parks is if they're gonna see these movies in theaters and make them successes through word of mouth instead of simply streaming and social media. That's become devalued so much, especially in the last couple of years with bots, with everything and all that. So I think in a strange way, the human experience is starting to kick back a little bit. You know, people are looking to be in the worlds of their movies that they really like. I mean, even Netflix with the whole concept of Netflix house is that you're gonna walk through the world, interact with so many different props and all that before you sit down and you watch a movie or an episode of a show. everybody in the streaming industry is realizing there is limits to what we can do, but there are interesting avenues that have opened up thanks to streaming, thanks to how connected people want to be. And for these legacy companies like Disney and all that who just join in the game instead of necessarily innovating it from the start, they are still very much primed to just build off of what they have because it's going to normalize to something closer to what they've already kind of known for a longer time and have the resources and industry for. So now I'm not terribly, like, worried about Disney. I expect things to be changing for the better for their movies and all. I mean, we're seeing even in Galaxy's Edge, if we're gonna bring up something specific with Star Wars, they finally made that full push to saying like, "Okay, that big space with Millennium Falcon, that's gonna be original trilogy." They're making it a Star Wars land instead of just a part of the sequel era. Now, if Starfighter does well, if Mandalorian Grogu does well, if Ahsoka season 2 maybe it leads into 3 or a movie or something, we'll see more of those characters just pop up. We'll see the sequels kinda still carve their own place. Maybe we'll get some prequels with Hondo and Naka and maybe some characters like Thrawn and all that. There's full understanding that you need to put these things in theaters. You need to get people excited and talking about it, and then the people want to continue feeling like they've lived in that world or want to re-experience that world, and that's why they go to the parks. And if a big company with so many parks like Disney can't do that and then rebound it back to their film successes, and you're seeing smaller anime studios that pay their animators barely any money but are now making huge profits off of their own parks and in a way could probably help stabilize and improve their industry, then I mean the whole game of the film industry falls apart if these big dogs can't make that changes, and I'm not super worried about that.
Yeah, you will continue to see the movies and parks crossover. I think that's something they've really tried to incorporate in the last decade. I would say Star Wars Land, Galaxy's Edge is kind of the thing that started that. It being the first, well, it was the first ever land that was made that was entirely based on one property. And so, well, it was the first non-Disney, I guess, one. They had Toy Story Land, I believe, before. I think that was it because Toontown's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different stuff. They've had the main lands, but in Disneyland specifically, it was the first one, right? You'll continue to see that stuff crossover, and that's been a big part of the Josh D'Amaro reign at Disney Parks is continued IP push. Again, a lot of Disney Parks fans don't like that because what are some of the biggest IPs within the parks? The Haunted Mansion, Thunder Mountain, Space Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean. Those were all original to the parks. That's where they were created for the parks. And so we won't really get any of that type of stuff anymore, at least not in the mainstream parks. You might see them where they usually experiment is overseas. They experiment in Japan because, especially in Japan, those parks aren't owned by Disney. So they're willing to take chances if the owners of those parks are willing to take chances. Disney will offer their services to create something unique. But you won't see that as much in America where they have to pay for everything because they don't want a flop ride, even though I really do think anything they make is going to bring people in. It's proven that over the years. But that connection to the parks is what we'll continue to see movies made, and we'll continue to see rides and lands made. One of the reasons we got Zootopia 2, even though the first one was incredibly successful, was because they built Zootopia Land in Shanghai Disneyland, and it was huge, and people loved it, and it grew the brand even more. So we will continue to see that marriage between parks and what is made, especially in animation, and that can be for better or worse. But right now, at least, most of the stuff they've done in connection when it comes to sequels that are motivated by parks have been pretty good. Moana 2 being the outlier, but Moana 2 was, an amalgamation of a TV show that was cut down and stripped down into a film. And I blame that more on why that movie wasn't good than specifically the fact that they made a Moana 2. Because I think if they make Moana 3 with the intention of it being a theatrical film, I think it will be really good. Because Zootopia 2 was good. Frozen 2 was good enough. And I think Frozen 3 will be good. So we will see moving forward. And I think part of it too is it has elevated the need for these sequels to be good because they're investing not just in the films, but they're investing so much money into that IP, into the parks, that you can't have people all of a sudden hate that IP. And we could use Star Wars as an example of that, right? Like, even though Star Wars Galaxy's Edge has been successful, even though people still love it, and even though there are big fans of the sequels, and I'm not saying anything about the sequels specifically from my own point of view, but from the general public perception, the sequels hadn't been received well, especially the last two, and it got progressively worse. And now they had $1 billion poured into the sequels in the parks alone. And now you're seeing them slowly pull back on that. And that was always kind of the risk you took when you devoted something to new IP instead of nostalgia IP. Um, and so we'll see which thing they decide to go with in the future because nostalgia IP is safer. New IP is riskier, but it can have big dividends and have bigger dividends moving forward because people haven't seen it before, right? So we shall see. But yeah, Disney changing CEO, changing leadership, interesting as always. And we continue to look forward to hopefully great experiences at the parks and great movies moving forward because they have started to right the ship now in the last few years. And everything seems to at least be back to making quality products, even if we're still waiting for some massive hits from a Marvel or Star Wars or even Disney animation and Pixar. They haven't had like an all timer in the last 5 years or so. So we'll see moving forward. Let's take some of your guys' questions, though, as we are about 30 minutes into the stream. We get to the other quick hit stories a little bit later, if time permits. And start with Brandon, who says, non-Star Wars question, does Masters of the Universe reboot look like it could be a good movie based off the trailer and an homage to the original 80s cartoon? I've never really had any connection to Masters of the Universe. No family members or anything that loved it from the 80s. Nobody really in my life connected to it. So my connection to it has been the people on the internet really telling me it was cool. I'm generally aware of the characters. I've not seen the original movie, but even with all of that and like zero connection to the movie outside of, being aware of the property, I thought the trailer looked pretty fun. I'm ever since Dungeons and Dragons, that movie that came out a couple of years ago, which I thought looked horrible and then got pretty good reviews and ended up being pretty good. Ever since then, I've been a little bit more open minded on embracing fun fantasy. And I think between that and Superman and a lot of things bringing back joy into our properties. I think Masters of Evil looks like a fun time, and I'm excited to embrace it. I mean, we have very little fantasy, especially when it comes to film. If Lord of the Rings re-releases showed anything, it's that people have an appetite for it when it's done right. People love that stuff and get really invested in that stuff when it's done right, and we'll see if they can do it right in the future. But I would love if this movie is great because it would mean another fantasy franchise actually existing for us in theatrical. And it seems like fantasy recently, maybe just to comp for format, or maybe because of the success, most recent fantasy success really was Game of Thrones. It seems like fantasy has been pushed to TV more so, and I would love a return to the glory days of theatrical fantasy when we had Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Narnia all coming out at the same time. I know Masters of Evil isn't quite in that same realm because it's obviously based on toys rather than novels, but like to me and to a lot of people in Hollywood, it's the same thing because it's got magical creatures and swords and all that type of stuff. To them, it's like people like swords and medieval looking stuff. We'll make more of that. And so I hope it's a success. And I hope it's good. And I'm really actually excited to see it now after that trailer.
Strangely, I guess I have more of a connection to He-Man than you do, but I used to remember watching as a kid watching like Transformers Generation 1 on TV just because I was up too late or because it was just on at a random hour. But yeah, I mean, that was where a lot of my original love came from. I'd like watch those episodes and once in a while get some Thundercats, some G.I. Joe, and then some He-Man. So I can't say like I remember everything. I don't think He-Man was one of the better shows of that era. It just was one of the more iconic because it had such a very distinct visual language, even amongst an era where you had robots that were turning into cars and soldiers versus ninjas and whatnot, right? So I've seen enough of it that I can understand, and I've been kinda keeping track of, like, spinoffs like She-Ra and then the She-Ra that happened on Netflix, you know, and then the He-Man show that happened that was, more focused on Teela, which was kind of like a bait and switch, kinda like how we've seen Scott Pilgrim versus the World and that new TV show pulled it off. It just happened to get a lot of negative attention online for that, but, with these '80s shows, there's always gonna be people who have a very strong, either love or hatred towards how their childhood has been brought back to life again, even though they've always wanted to continue, right? I mean, I think one of the greatest examples of that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? We've had animated shows and reboots since the '80s, and they've all been really solidly well received. There's never been something that's been so bad. The movies are a little bit more hit or miss because truly, since that first live action one, there hasn't been anything super great, but I know that animation movie that came out recently, that Spider-Verse style, did pretty good, edged out just enough, and had, like, a nice transition TV show either come out or is in the process of coming out before they work on the sequel, so it's not that you can't have these toy-based legacy shows continue and be readapted. It's just you have to do right by those fans, and you still have to appeal to all these new people, and you can't make it too different, right? And what I've seen doesn't seem like anything too different. It just seems like it's the first fully realized version of a live action adaptation of that era. Even those G.I. Joe films with Channing Tatum and all that in the first one, and The Rock, like not really G.I. Joe, alright? Like, they got some of it right. That's why I was, like, excited for, like, something like Snake Eyes because I was like, "I'm not gonna watch it per se, but I wanted to see what this could start up," but it seems like that movie misunderstood a bit of the character. Um, I forget the actor's name from Crazy Rich Asians was the star of that, and that kinda changed the origin from the start. Plus, his face was showing too much, and that's kinda defeats the whole point of Snake Eyes as an adult. Right? Like things like that, you can't fundamentally mess up for these fans. But everything about this He-Man looks right. And the fact of the matter is, this is also being directed by someone who's had experience with '80s properties. He's directed the Bumblebee movie, which since Michael Bay is probably before Transformers 1 was the most well-respected, Transformers movie, and it is definitely something I wish we had more sequels to. It seemed like it was gonna start a reboot of the franchise and then never really happened. We ended up getting, like, Beast Wars, and then now supposedly we're gonna get live action Transformers crossover with G.I. Joe. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, this could be a really smart move. I believe this is Amazon MGM too, right? So this could be a really big hit for them. Amazon has done fantasy too, like, they obviously have a full commitment to Rings of Power, and it's a full 5-year order. They unfortunately canceled Wheel of Time just as it actually became great for me, right? There's still a couple things I wish could have been done better, but that's more so the book they adapted for this season was arguably the whole peak of the series, and there are just things that you can only really do with 10, 12 episodes. Probably need to have more time, but otherwise, it's still a very, very strong adaptation for me and then that got canceled. They've had a couple of things in the pipeline that have come and gone. I don't think Amazon is quite right. Any of these like very digital focused streamers are not quite right for fantasy. Fantasy is almost regardless of like the power and the scale and how the magic is used and all it's still dependent very much on the practical feeling, the props, the things that you can reuse, the nature of it all. And I think Amazon and these streamers that have jumped into fantasy and it kind of flopped, they're not well suited for TV show length. I think they're much more suited for a movie length. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this works out for them. This is the right match of not necessarily having something so heavily like weighed down by lore and everything like we would see in a book-based fantasy series, but it's also got enough action and appeal to it that doesn't need to be dependent on these actors being stars or anything in their roles. And it's got quite a good cast too, to mind you. Like Idris Elba's in this. Nicholas Guyton's been a pretty solid actor. Camila Mendes, like these are names that people have grown around with TV shows and some streaming movies and all that. So I think it's a smart choice for them. I think this is how if they nail this right, they kept Jared Leto behind Skeletor's face too, so you won't ever have to see him, right? Like if you're opposed to him as well, right? Like so far this seems right, and visually it seems quite strong. I think one thing I've hated about these films that have kind of jumped in that campiness and all that of like a different alternative world to ours. Like, for example, Barbie is they nailed, like, the Barbie world itself really well, and then you go to the real world of it, and it just looks pretty bad. Like, most of unfortunately, um, uh, the Ferrera's scenes in, the live action segment of, like, the real world of Barbie, unfortunately, like, that stuff looked like a car wreck to me most of the time. Like, it just didn't look very good versus just some of the establishing shots and the choices that are being made for just the regular world while still having campiness to it, while still having fun, being a little meta about it. It seems like they're maybe nailing this, right? If they can nail both sides of, like, the fantasy and the real and manage but pool their resources, pool their talent, and find possibly the right choice for them, as a more data analytics, digital only sort of streamer before in fantasy, this could turn into something really good, and just based off the views alone on the trailer, people are liking it quite a bit. They are saying like, "Wow, this looks accurate. This looks like things that I imagined or I thought the show was a little off about, and now this feels like they've taken this next step for me that, it just doesn't I never thought I'd ever be able to see, right? So, very, very positive news, right? And, I mean, even if you wanna, like, bring in the online rage baiters and the bots and people who just hate everything, they can also look at this as, like, a polar opposite to the Netflix He-Man show that was the most recent thing to come out, right? So, it's got everything kinda working for it right now, and frankly, I'm excited too. I wanna see something silly and dumb that succeeds, right? I was a huge fan of Dungeons& and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. It just got sandwiched in the worst possible month. It had really poor marketing, but yeah, I mean, as far as it goes, that was around the time I was really playing Dungeons& and Dragons regularly, and I just found it really fun and hilarious and quite well done, and I know there was rumors of a spin-off show, but I don't think it ever materialized, so hopefully, this could be a start of a Master of the universe, and if there's people out there that are telling you that the '80s movie with Dolph Lundgren was great, it wasn't. It really wasn't. I mean, I believe Lucas wanted to direct it at one point, and then he was like, "No, I'm not gonna do it," and then it just turned out bad. There's people online that the small minority that are hating on this, Masters of the Universe trailer are like, "Oh, I love the '80s movie," and everybody else in the comments is like, "No, you didn't. You're just trying to be a contrarian at this point." Nobody liked it, so a lot of things are just lining up really right for them at this point.
Yeah, and I think it looks really good. I'm shocked because I really had no interest in I mean, I had an interest in the idea, but I had no interest in this specific property, no connection to it, and, saw the trailer and really enjoyed it. I think what these Mattel movies seem to be doing, at least recently, has been at least getting fairly prolific filmmakers on board and letting them drive the character. So many of these adaptations from toys in the past have been driven by the specific need for a type of toy, but I think Mattel has kind of realized that a lot of their brands are not what they once were, and Barbie and that kind of unique direction revitalized what their brand was overall, and it brought the joy back to their brand that people had for it in the past, and it also brought a new, refreshed joy to it from younger generations and people maybe who didn't have any interest in it before. So that's for me where I am with Masters of the Universe. No interest, no connection, and now I'm at least intrigued, and the filmmakers have got me interested in at least seeing what they can do with it. So looking forward to it. Thanks for the question. Critical Thinker says, "What do you personally think should be the core of Star Wars moving forward? Putting aside, obviously, the box office returns of films that haven't come out, Starfighter, post sequel trilogy, Ray, Finn, Poe, pre sequel trilogy, cast, which is the most likely? If it is the sequel trilogy cast, how likely do you think fans or general audiences will accept it?" I mean, I feel like we've talked about this a few times before, but in general, I think what they're going to do versus what I would do is the way I would answer it. What they're going to is going to be focus on the post sequel trilogy timeline, fix that, get people invested in trying to see what happens next in the Star Wars story. Because I think they thought they struck gold with The Mandalorian, but they've also, I think, realized that when you tell stories within a box, you can only go so far. and it still will always have the prequel effect of like everybody knows where this is going for certain characters, right? We don't know what happens to Din Djarin, so it's still exciting, but we do know what happens to Luke Skywalker, unfortunately, in the movies. We know what happens to Han Solo. We know what happens to Princess Leia. So even though personally I would prefer to see their stories told, ultimately some of the stakes are gone that were there before because they live until those movies. You know what happens to them ultimately in those movies. I still think there's a lot of interest and excitement and joy that can be brought to fans via their stories and finding out information about them. And personally, if I was doing it, I would do the recast and I would tell their stories. And I've talked about it before, of course, but I've said it a dozen times. But I would do an alternate timeline with a recast version. Like I would want to do a recast for canon, but if they're not going to do that, just to tell Luke, Han, and Leia stories, I would start a Legends timeline series of movies and just adapt the books. And it doesn't have to be within the Star Wars canon. It doesn't even have to be within Star Wars Legends, is what I've said in the past. It's just an attempt to give beloved stories and adaptation on film, which is what Lord of the Rings has done, which is what every book who's been adapted into movies has done, right? I mean, how many adaptations of Frankenstein and Dracula do we have, right? It's that type of thing. It's do you want to look at these books as works of literature and how can we bring them to life? That's what I would do with that specific side, but that would be a side project. What they're going to do is focus on post sequels. What they're going to do, in my opinion, and what I fully believe they're going to do is use Ryan Gosling, use the new kid that's in Starfighter, and use the other characters that come out of that, any other new characters that are introduced in Kinberg's trilogy, and build out that post Rise of Skywalker timeline around new faces, most likely younger faces. The irony is not lost on many of us Star Wars fans that they didn't like the idea of using teenagers or young, like tweens, to lead the Star Wars franchise when George Lucas was wanting to do that. But now they are like, crap, let's do it with a group of kids who can grow into Star Wars. And I think that's always been, it's a difficult thing to do, but it's something that long lasting franchises do best. And that's what we've seen with something like Harry Potter, right? You cast young and let these actors grow into the characters and just become the faces of something. Star Wars doesn't have any faces now without Luke, Han, and Leia. Who can be that next generation? Yes, Rafe and Poe are iconic, but they're also controversial. How do we rebuild? And I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to use a young group of people to create a new central core group of characters with the trappings of a Ryan Gosling and a Daisy Ridley and an Oscar Isaac and a John Boyega and anybody else and Amy Adams all around these characters. You come for those people, but these characters, hopefully, you fall in love with to the point where when we have that Jason and Jaina moment where they start to take over as the main characters of the story and the previous characters, the legacy characters, start to not become quite as involved, you're willing to accept it because that baton is passed over time, not just in 3 movies, not just in by killing off our main characters, right? It's a slow build, as it should have been, how it would have been in an alternate reality where, we weren't dealing with 75 to 80-year-old actors, where we weren't dealing with the death of one of the major characters, or major actors, where we, didn't do the sequels, maybe 10 years after we probably should have if we were gonna use those actors. There are a lot of real world constraints around specifically the sequel story. But in an ideal world, you grow with a new generation while these other characters shepherd it. And if someone was to die, someone is to die, but you grow with them all being kind of a unit. And I think that's what their plan is. And if they do indeed do Luke's son, which has been a theory, I don't know if it's like it's one I love, and I actually have this whole video I'm planning on working on currently where I kinda outlined a way they can, um I'll probably use something like fix the movies in the title, but kind of that general, like, idea of how do we give fans a scene with Luke or a scene with these characters that we never got to see, within the sequels, and how do we use flashbacks? Because I think they could do something really cool with, maybe a flashback in Starfighter or something else where if it is indeed Luke's child, or if it is indeed somebody who was at Luke's temple who's going to be this kid off opposite Ryan Gosling in Starfighter, there's always the possibility of seeing a Luke scene, and you could go back in time and show that, and show Luke being cool, and show him being powerful and having a lightsaber duel. And I would love to see that, something like that, come from this. But I'll save most of the details I've thought up over the last couple weeks for a video like that you'll be seeing in a couple weeks. But yeah, I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to continue to grow, continue to change. If it's a child of Luke Skywalker, to me, even better. But I think they want you to grow with these new characters and grow with the franchise and not have to worry about trilogies, not have to worry about specific arcs. They want it to continue to go beyond. They want you interested in Star Wars every time they finish a Star Wars trilogy or finish a Star Wars movie. They still want you interested. They don't want it to feel like it's over completely. And that's what the EU did really well. Was even though we'd have these big events like New Jedi Order, there always felt like there was room still for more, and there was new characters enough that you're interested in exploring. And the Star Wars movies haven't necessarily done that. So I'm looking forward to seeing their attempt at it, and hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, I know we probably have answered in some way, but just to add off of what Liam said, at the end of the day, you can't ignore this whole Mandoverse because it became such a huge success to the point that, like I've been saying, like when you watch this teaser trailer, or as it was just titled, a regular official trailer, that came out around the Jimmy Kimmel situation, people are like, "This looks bad. Doesn't look like it's color graded. I don't understand why it's IMAX, blah, blah, blah." And I was definitely one of those people. I was a lot more critical of that trailer than I was for other trailers that have come out. But I have also seen, in my defense, the Celebration trailer at that point. So I've seen that this is something that could be a lot more capable. Yet seeing in person in movie theaters, like before IMAX, before everything else, regular screenings, anytime they bring up the one that's in theaters, which has a little bit of mix of the stuff from Celebration scenes without the hallway sequence, which is much better cut and all that, kids are just excited. They're selling Baby Yoda, they're jumping up and down. So, like, just like I mentioned early in the stream, it is like one of those trailers like Hoppers where it's captured the kids that actually need to grow up and stick around with the franchise and actually be convinced of like, "Hey, I wanna follow these characters for 10, 15, 20 years at minimum before another cast comes," right? That's like a big thing that has happened since, the graduation of all the 2000s IPs that succeeded. Once that story was told and it reaches its grand conclusion and has been mostly well landed or been abandoned in progress, right? It's like, alright, that's it. You can do some side things here and there, spin-offs, but you're not ever gonna continue the story, and now, since MCU took over and has continued, everybody's like, "Yeah, even if there's down periods here, I still wanna see what comes next. I still wanna be caught up. I still." That's why Doomsday being a sequel to Endgame and incorporating as much of this multiverse saga without having to be dependent on it is another big swing by MCU being like, "Hey, we don't know how much you know, but we're trying to give you what you need to know, and we're trying to get you to be ready and prepared for everything that comes out of these 2 movies, possibly 3, and then we can jump into the introduction of the X-Men, which is always gonna be a big selling point for them." Right? Same way here with Star Wars. They know that these fans are just convinced and are love Baby Yoda regardless of the writing and quality. And at the end of the day, like Lucas said, this is a franchise that was made for like 12-year-old boys. If you're a 12-year-old looking at this and you're excited for it, or someone a little bit younger, I love Ahsoka, I love Bo-Katan, I love Grief Karga, like all these characters that have popped up over the years. And on top of that, you want to see the continued adventures of Din Djarin and Baby Yoda. The movie should only be a exciting prospect for you. And hopefully that Super Bowl trailer that we think is gonna come out is gonna be exciting for everybody in terms of plot, in terms of character executions, in terms of just feeling bigger and grander than anything we've seen so far, right? So, yeah, it's one of the most secretive films that we've had in Star Wars in a while. There's been 0 leaks. You can say some of that's because they use volume, but they've definitely used plenty of sets all the time too. But yeah, I mean, I think because of the success of Mandoverse, they can't just ignore that. They need to make sure that it reaches its conclusion, prequel effect or not. They have to be like, okay, we need to tell something that's mid-budget, kind of esque Star Trek '90s films where they redress the next generation sets, and we're like, okay, now we can do films for the original trilogy or the original series characters that became so famous through the conventions and all that and reruns and help continue this into this golden age. And it continued for that whole decade. I think that's kind of how you have to look at the Mandoverse now. It'll never truly, I think, in my mind, be where you'll see the massive visual technological innovations. It might be behind the scenes stuff that will be like, oh, that'll be really good to know and build off of for future filmmakers. Uh, I'm just convinced Favreau, at least for this one, if there are more movies, at least this one might have some great IMAX scenes, just like the season 2 premiere of Mandalorian did. But for the most part, I'm treating this as like those sort of Star Trek films. Like, I'm excited to see what comes next for these characters. I wanna know what happened after, what they're most famous for, or, what their initial big breakthrough was, and I wanna see the conclusion of that for everything that's been tied into it, while also still being a semi-reboot for the people who fell off around season 1 and season 2 of Mando. So, that has to happen, and like Liam said, the bigger thing is what's the future? At the end of the day, people wanna know what's something that's unexpected and new. It doesn't have things that we necessarily can derive from legends at this point too. The idea of a fractured galaxy is super appealing, right? That's a huge selling point of like the semi reboot of the Old Republic. Once you change the free to play, once you've continued the next real big story mode, that's what definitely got a lot of influx of people to come in because it wasn't necessarily Sith versus Jedi anymore. There was just so many different factions, Eternal Empire, etc. Right? So we've already seen it kind of happen within the franchise itself of having the fractured and separated galaxy with interesting combinations, interesting new things to be shaped out of the devastation and destruction before. This is the first time where it'll happen where we don't have like a successive big government. I don't think we're not gonna have a new republic of some sorts in here, but it just won't be the galaxy spanning one that is implied to be there in sequels. So it'll be a fresh start, and hopefully they still do go back and flesh out the sequel world before the trilogy. They continue making animated shows and stuff to really flesh out the sequels themselves, but the sequel trilogy is gonna be like the tip of the spear. Everything else is gonna be the bigger body. This is the real weight of the whole era now, and it's not gonna be called the sequel trilogy era. It'll be called something else. I'm sure they're gonna try to go for more iconic names instead of First Order versus Resistance War and stuff, right? Like, they need to hit iconic moments here, and to simply ignore the stuff that has worked, like the fact that people still think for the most part these characters were well cast in the sequel trilogy, that they still were better acted than a lot of performances throughout Star Wars. Now you just have to make up for the writing there and allow them to grow as characters, to be originals, to take the qualities that we thought were gonna be played out by the sequel trilogy's end and continue that here, while you're still allowing these new characters to flourish and grow as preteens, as young adults, and make, like, a supporting cast of characters. Like, in a strange way, we might never be getting the new Jedi Order film, but that's might be because it's being folded into a new Jedi Order-esque cast of characters that are growing and following throughout all these movies and maybe 1 or 2 high profile shows of sorts. So, I think that's how you have to look at it. It's a big 2 timeline thing, but Star Wars fans are good at juggling timelines. I'm not worried about that. One will be about the future, one will be about just continuing what worked really well, but the money dictates it's probably better to do it in movies, and baby good is unavoidable, right? So, I think that's how it's gonna be, and, for all we know, Mandoverse might only have, like, 4 or 5 movies in it, and then it'll be done. So that'll open up maybe Dawn of the Jedi and stuff like that next. But if they're not working on that, if they wanna extend it out, maybe it's a good testing ground for, like, building out the equipment, the production timeline, and changing it away from being so volume, post-production first focused into whatever is necessary to do a proper Andor HBO-esque show for the Old Republic, which is a huge, huge selling point, and it'll definitely reach by the 30-ish year mark at critical mass for wanting people to be like, "Hey, I wanna see that. I have the nostalgia for it, and I wanna see what the big budget of it version of that will look like." So, we already got a small start there with the Fate of the Old Republic trailer that was released at the game show, so that's the only other timeline I see happen, but I think it's really dependent on how that Mandoverse timeline plays out because post Rise of Skywalker timeline is definitely gonna be the priority with how Starfighter's been hyped up from the beginning.
Brandon's next question is non-Star Wars question number 2. Have you seen Daredevil Born Again season two's trailer? I have seen it, and I thought it was pretty good. It's a teaser, it's short. Um, but I liked overall season 1. Felt like there was some choppiness to the way the season was constructed, but overall there were interesting plot lines, and it was nice to have, violent Daredevil back, like R-rated Daredevil, not PG Daredevil, and it was great to have the whole cast back, and I thought they did a good job with most of them. Most of them got a good scene, except for poor Foggy. But I enjoyed season one for the most part overall. It still never really hit any of the peaks of the 3 seasons from Netflix to me, but I'm looking forward to seeing where it rounds out because originally this was supposed to be a 1 season, 24 episode show, and so it did kind of feel like that at points where it felt a little choppy, because it felt like when they decided to make it 2 seasons, some of the plot lines either got shrunk down or extended and maybe different there was a different emphasis on different things in order to build excitement and anticipation for a second season. But my favorite thing about Daredevil season 2 is that it's coming out a year after season 1, and we finally have a show that has a new season a year after, which is how it used to be, how it should be with TV, and how I hope it is in the future, especially when you have a show that's pitched in this way, where you have a complete kind of story. If you're going to make multiple seasons, there's no excuse for it to not have a season 2 within a year. So we shall see, but looking forward to seeing it. And I'm excited to see Jessica Jones as well.
Yeah, I like the trailer quite a bit, and I agree with all the points that Liam said. I think a big thing that we have to also consider is like you said, it was supposed to be like a season split into 2 parts, like 9 episodes in one half of the year and one in the later half. But the original showrunners also made something that was a lot more of a courtroom show. Like there was rumors that Matt wasn't gonna wear a suit until like episode 4, right? Which is super late. But yeah, there's a lot of episodes that were completely new, right? But there's also a lot that was salvaged from the original vision. You don't just throw away stuff that was filmed if it doesn't make sense to, right? Even something like Solo Star Wars movie, even if it was essentially reshot all the way through again, there are scenes that we know for sure are from the original Lord and Miller version. So yeah, it is a bit of a choppy season from what I've heard. I've not gone around to it yet because I'm still working through the Netflix shows as a whole, especially now that everything has been treated as canon and is in the MCU's official timeline. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for season 2. This is where they have the full proper vision. This is where the Loki showrunners, after hitting out of the park in season 2, get a chance to try again with a show that, like you said, will come out yearly and hopefully has already a season 3 pretty much in the pre-production stage, ready to start production sometime as soon as season 2 rolls out here. But I'm excited for what I've seen from the stuff that we've seen come out from paparazzi and all that. Just the fact that we're getting the proper DD, the double D on the chest here, right, with the black suit. Um, yeah, I mean, there are things that you can say didn't work 100% in season 1, but the fact that they brought in a lot of, like, Charles Soule's villain in the Muse in season 1 and how well received that was, White Tiger or White Panther, I forget the name of that character, right, how well that was received. They did a lot right despite it feeling super choppy, and now that we're gonna get another season, we're also getting the Punisher special that will have synergy leading into Spider-Man: Brand New Day. We are entering truly what was maybe promised around 2016, 2017 with all the hype for Defenders, having proper street level storytelling in New York, right? And how dark and ugly and messy that can get. And the last time we've had something anywhere close to that was 90s Spider-Man cartoons, right? That finally have that happen here. And I do think, especially with the collapse of the Sony cinematic universe around all the spin-offs Spider-Man characters, that we are in a position now to get or maybe already have had Sony sign off on some more ownership or more usability for characters, and I pray we get a cameo or like a sign of Spider-Man, by the end of Daredevil season 2 because there's no way with the rumors of Daredevil not really, showing up in Brand New Day that they're not planning something with this iconic duo to happen at some point. So, I think we're only gonna be looking for greener pastures ahead with Daredevil as a whole, and hopefully the whole Defenders verse when they get their full second chance, and Jessica Jones coming back. You know, Kristen not looking like she's aged a day, it's been, like, what, 8 years since season 3 and all that, right? Fantastic stuff to see, and I hope, we get Iron Fist and Luke Cage back, and we get to do a little bit more of a Heroes for Hire story with them instead of having them have individual shows. That's maybe where the weakness lied, but, yeah, I all I can say is I'm excited because that's the side of Spider-Man that we've and everything about the street level stuff that we failed to see in the MCU, that we failed to see with that character in all its live action adaptations, and seemingly, we're finally pushing towards that early college age Peter where things are going crazy, and he's gonna be surrounded with a bunch of other people who are going crazy as well, trying to keep everything locked down and be helpful to people while their whole worlds are exploding, and not necessarily having a Thanos or somebody walking into their situation, right? So, very excited to see how it pans out.
Brandon says, "Did you hear Ian McKellen in a new interview accidentally spoiled a big scene with his character in Avengers Doomsday?" Yeah, I did. I guess I think people are over exaggerating how big of a spoiler it really
Yeah.
is. I mean, if you didn't expect some destruction in Avengers Doomsday, then I don't know what movie you were really expecting. But in regards to what he spoiled, I'm just kind of excited that Magneto's gonna be powerful. He from the small glimpse we got, we see kind of really ancient looking Magneto and Professor X, right? They look tired and they look old, and yes, they are. Both the actors and the characters are old and tired, but um, it's cool that we're gonna get to see powerful Magneto again. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm excited Ian McKellen seems excited about that because he's fantastic as Magneto. Was the perfect choice, and I can't wait to see him back one last time. I would assume as Magneto.
Yeah, I found out because people were making edits after that interview clip, and they just suddenly transitioned into, like, all of these Fox X-Men movie scenes of McKellen's Magneto, and yeah, like Liam said, I think people are blowing it up a little too much, but so is Magneto apparently, so I'm excited to see what happens here.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's cool that I mean, hopefully we do get like legit scenes for each of these characters because if this is the final farewell, again, to the X-Men from Fox. And it truly is the last hurrah for, Magneto and Professor X and Logan and Cyclops and all these characters, Jean Grey, Mystique. Um, I hope we get some time to shine for all of them. And that does include even the ones that we've seen a lot, like Magneto and like Professor X. Like I still want moments for them, even if Cyclops is going to be a bigger character because we've barely gotten any Cyclops in the past, I still do really want Magneto back. And I want to see because Ian McKellen Magneto has been awesome, but he hasn't really had that insane power level that we know he can get to, that we've seen in the comics, we've seen in the TV show, the animated show. So I want to see that because with how comic booky this story is going to get, with how fantasy heavy, with how action heavy this will be, it's a far cry from the attempt at grounded a little bit more realistic X-Men stories that they were hell-bent on making between 2000 and 2014 when we last really saw Magneto in action. So as much as I love something like Days of Future Past and as much as I love X2, we haven't seen like this level of Magneto yet. So very excited for that. Next up, we have, let's see, scroll back to the top. We have Critical Thinker who said, "What do you think is the best book for each of the main characters in New Jedi Order?" I'd say The Unifying Force for Luke, Star by Star for Leia, Agents of Chaos 1 for Han, Edge of Victory 1 for Anakin, Star by Star for Jaina, and Traitor for Jason. All. Um, as much as I find Agents of Chaos to be a little plotting, it is underrated how much great stuff Lucino does there for Han. That one really stood out to me over the course of my read throughs through New Jedi Order. Um, because that one, nobody, I'm a huge Lucino fan, obviously, but nobody really talks about Agents of Chaos, and usually it is considered one of the worst. Uh, it's definitely considered one of the worst of the like mini series within New Jedi Order. Um, but probably the only one most people consider worse is Force Heretic. And it is plotting. It's overlong. It doesn't need to be 2 books, really. But that first book does so much good stuff with Han in the wake of Chewie dying that it is really really strong stuff. So I like that you picked that one for Han. Um, Anakin Edge of Victory is awesome, and Anakin in Edge of Victory 1 is peak Anakin. So yeah, I mean I think you picked pretty much the big stories for almost all these characters just in general. Obviously, Luke and Leia, Han have more big stories in other places, but I pretty much agree with your list almost exactly. I would add Leia. She has some good stuff across the series too. She has some good stuff in Balance Point as well that I liked. Jason, I think I mean, it's hard to beat Trader for Jason. I think Jaina is the one that it kind of goes back and forth. Her story, has a lot of ebbs and flows throughout New Jedi Order. But Star by Star is as good a pick as anything. It's better than Dark Journey, which is the Jaina book per se. So yeah, I would pretty much agree with your list.
It's a pretty complete list when it comes to the main characters. Um, I guess you could kind of throw in Force Heretic trilogy for Mara because at that point that is like where she's really dealing with her relationship, dealing with the illness and everything, and she has been sidelined for a big chunk of the story, at least the Mara that we know from Bantam. Is it Stackpole that does the Dark Tide
Yeah,
duology with Corn? Is Corn in that one? I
Corn.
want to say.
Yeah, Corn's the main character of those.
Yeah, so I'm always gonna appreciate Stackpole now that I've finally gotten a chance to read X-Wing books rightfully, and um, obviously Cornhorn's one of my favorite Legends characters. But as far as like MC level storylines, they're not really MCs. They're kind of like how we've been talking about how New Jedi Order will play out with um or this new post Rise of Skywalker timeline with movies with the sequel characters kind of play out. We'll still have maybe some of these sequel characters be leads, some who won't be, but yeah, it's like it'll be a mix of things, right? And it's gonna be based off the New Jedi Order series here, where you'll have a Corn kind of take over pretty early on in the series, but that's really the majority of his contribution and all that. So yeah, I think you got a good list there. I think that's I'm not gonna really touch that other than just adding in Dark Tide for Corn and just Mara finally getting a chance to grow and stretch out as a character in the Force Heretic trilogy, even though it might be a little overlong being the only trilogy that we have in New Jedi Order.
Yeah, pretty complete stuff. I mean, I guess uh, you could throw in Vector Prime for Chewbacca, unless that is too soon for that character. But yeah, good list. Thanks. Brandon says, if Masters of the Universe does well, do you think Hollywood could make more 80s cartoon movies like Thundercats for its universe? Absolutely. I mean, I think right now, like we talked about a little bit earlier, we are at the peak currently of embracing the truest form of nostalgia, of camp, of cheese, of joy within these franchises, right? And that's kind of been what's missing from previous adaptations. The 2000s wanted to pull out all the like campiness of things and make them as not even really like the 2000s weren't necessarily about groundedness, but they were about trying to remove the camp, just make it darker. And then once the Dark Knight hit in 2008, basically from 2008 to COVID, we were more focused on how do we make it more realistic and still keep a little bit of the spirit of the original thing in it. But we also hit peak 80s nostalgia between like 2010 and 2015, and everything got made. Now, I think we've moved on from the nostalgia goggles of the 80s. It's not quite as popular to make 80s nostalgia pieces, but has been more popular than ever right now to make things that are full of camp and joy and represent the spirit of what those original things were, which is what the 80s really did to embrace these types of properties, right? It's why these were successful. And so even when you have a Masters of the Universe movie that might not be considered great, it at least embraced the spirit and the campiness and that vibe, which I think we dropped there for a second, but I think we're back now. But anyway, I'm excited to go back to 80s nostalgia. And I think this time in this period of time, we're embracing the vibes that were there and the joy and the optimism and the excitement that was around a lot of these properties at the time. And if Master of the Universe succeeds financially, I have no doubt it will also succeed in at least creating the universe the way it wants to. There's no doubt in my mind that they'll consider making more of these properties in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna be a little bit harder in general for this to play out, though. It's not like the same as having Marvel's characters kind of spun off to a couple studios and all that. These are all shows that were at a different point in time dominating the little 80s toy era before all the laws and everything kind of came in place here. So, because of all of them being fairly successful in their own rights and having their own spin-offs, they've been sold off in a lot of different ways over years. It's not like a major sale at the last moment because 'cause you're kinda going broke like Stan Lee was with Marvel, right? And it's not a situation like DC where it's all kept in-house and they don't have any issues like that. It's just that the success of it kinda determined that once they fell off a bit, they were kind of parceled off to different studios that have been successful with them and whatnot. I think some have even passed between multiple studios and all that, so yeah, I mean, we're not gonna get like a Masters of the Universe cinematic universe spinoff tied to all these sort of things, but we can see people maybe make a push for that. But it's not like this 80s Hasbro universe hasn't been attempted for a while, right? Like we said, Transformers live action has not had a proper reboot, but they've been kind of trying to go back to G1 designs and all that with Beast Wars and all, and it did okay, but not great. Like I think they need a proper reboot there. I think they need a structural reboot. Thundercats, the last thing they had was on Cartoon Network, I believe, and I remember watching that, but it was a little bit criticized for, like, really weird pacing. The Thundercats are actual, like, a feline cat people, and it's a little bit of a different origin story. Um, it's weird. I don't know. I don't know if I could truly say, like, something is or isn't gonna happen, because this idea that Master of the Universe is opening the door is little incorrect. I think it's just the one that's probably the most assuredly going through the door and following in the footsteps of the remakes, the reboots of other properties that have done decently well. And now this is the first real big budget swing at this part of that Hasbro world, Kenner world that hasn't had a chance in a long, long time past like some animation here and there.
The stream.
Okay, I think you just came back. For some reason, you weren't populating. Can you guys see Liam now? HD Game Tube TV? Okay,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know, guys. I've seemingly thought I fixed the internet here, but it might just be Cox doing some disruptions, unfortunately.
All right. Well, we don't have much time left in the stream anyways, so we'll just run through the last few things here and then wrap it up as we're closing out. But next up was we've gone through quite a few Brandon, so go to the next person. We talked about Kevin's. Let's see, critical thinker. Gokinsman says if they flop or underperform, referring to Star Wars. Um, okay, we can talk about that. Let's get to HD Game 2, who says, do you think we will get more live action shows after Ahsoka season 2, or are they just going all in on movies? We're absolutely going to get more live action shows. I mean, I think there's no it's hard to keep a streaming service around at the price point Disney wants to keep it at without original content, and Star Wars is arguably the crown jewel of their streaming service, considering Marvel hasn't had a show that's been anywhere near the critical acclaim and anything near the overall pop culture movement that both Andor and The Mandalorian were. So, considering Star Wars is kind of the face of streaming on Disney Plus, I absolutely think we'll get more. I just think they're retooling what they want to do moving forward and what their plans are. Like we've talked about in the past few weeks, especially everything that we have seen so far had been announced basically at that 2020 Investors Day meeting. The exceptions were Andor, Mandalorian, and Obi-Wan Kenobi were announced prior. I think once Ahsoka wraps up, if it indeed ends with season 2, you will have seen the culmination of everything from live action Star Wars that had previously been announced. And I think 2027's Star Wars Celebration is where we're really going to find out what their plans are with live action television moving forward. I would be shocked if we don't hear at least a leak about another show prior to that, because if we don't, that means there's not another Star Wars live action show probably coming out next year. And that would be surprising. I still think they would like at least one a year, even with Marvel not really having much success in live action recently. We've, at least in terms of viewership and popularity, we've still gotten at least one Marvel show per year. And so I think that's still their plan for Marvel and Star Wars, but they haven't yet shown their cards yet. And I would imagine next year's celebration is the main place they're going to do that. And we'll probably find out about a piece of information for another show they're working on currently for 2027, some point in the second half of this year.
The only big rumor that we've had is the Cuse showrunners who I believe the father wrote on Lost, and he's bringing in his son. Um, there's it's called like Phantom Track 19 or something. We know nothing about it. I would think it's gonna be a different show than Mandoverse at this point. I don't think they wanna add to Mandoverse. I think they wanna consolidate Mandoverse, alright, and see how they can consolidate Ahsoka and Boba Fett and all these other characters that have been introduced and brought back via these 3 main shows for the Mandoverse. So I don't think it's Mandoverse. And Skeleton Crew kids, I really want them back, but I'm struggling to see where they'd fit in now that supposedly the Filoni New Republic enders on the back burner, and they were supposedly gonna feature of some sorts. But, yeah, I mean, I think we will. It might be like a super late 2027, kinda like a Boba Fett um, where, like, it drops, like, barely it can qualifies as a 2027 show, but I wouldn't be surprised if we are having a little bit of an extended delay. I think they really want to emphasize we're back in theaters with Mando and back in theaters and pushing the timeline forward with Starfighter, and animation hopefully fills in the gap there, and we get a show that's really good in Maul, and maybe we get a Voss and Ventress Hidden Path show or something like that. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would think so, but they have to now find that medium point between the popularity and the kind of sandboxy and episodic fun of Mandoverse and the very serialized yet super well mature, written, super expensive production of Andor that has very long scripts and longer seasons than in most other streaming shows, right? They have to find some middle point. I want to say getting back to that like Game of Thrones 10 episode HBO and 2010s release. Maybe that might be a move that you can compromise while also still, appealing to both sides of the Star Wars streaming fandom. So that's how I look at it. But as far as any others, I mean, we know about Rick Fumuyama's show. We talked about that, reported that it was being reworked or delayed or just kind of abandoned. Like we're not sure what the state of that is there. It's all kind of weird to think about with live action in general, let alone talking about specifics of TV in a world that's shifting right back to theaters for all its major franchises. But I think so. I think the short answer is I think so. I just don't really know what huge compelling show will come out that will make someone be like, "I'm gonna go see Starfighter in theaters," and then 2 months later, I'll be like, "I'm so excited to stick around on Disney Plus because I'm seeing this show," right? It has to be something, I'd say, notably big. I don't think it can just be another of these, like, funnish shows. It has to be something that is almost like the Daredevil of the MCU where will he ever maybe show up and fight a bunch of guys with, baton sticks that are like super aliens? No, right? Probably not. But he's got his own little niche that is just as important that can still affect the universe and play the story, the overall larger story in some way and some elements, right? And that's what this next show has to be. But will it be? I don't know. That's putting a lot on the next TV show. So I wouldn't say 2028 is completely out of the picture, but if they do 2027, I think they're barely gonna make it in there.
I agree. I think it would be December, November at the earliest to 27, unless there's something secretly about to go in production soon. Otherwise, they're not going to make that timeline. But but I still think with TV, I mean, I think there needs to be a division there. Like as much as we like seeing crossover, and we will see it at some point, it's been proven that it's very difficult to have interest in television and film to the point where people watch everything. The major hits, yes, but the lesser hits, people aren't gonna devote. They have so much TV to watch at home. People aren't gonna watch these mid-tier shows or these lower tier hits, right? So I think what they need to get back to, and what they probably would have done had maybe Starfighter existed into when Mandalorian and Grogu got greenlit, is they need to just kind of go back to that separation of this is TV and this is film. Not that Mandalorian necessarily needs to go back there, although I think it's a pretty safe bet that Mandalorian season 4 will come out at some point. But you need to have kind of the face of the TV side of Star Wars to at least, just like we've said with film, ground interest in Star Wars TV, right? Even if it doesn't lead to people watching spin-offs of it, of Mandalorian, if there's still like a popular show that they release every year or every other year, that at least grounds people into some general interest for Star Wars and a continuing storyline within TV, rather than having to get interested in a new show and new characters every single time, right? I think that's one thing that's been proven in this era of binge television is people like multiple season shows. They don't want to have to keep starting over and over and over and over again, especially within the same property, right? So we haven't seen spin-offs of shows necessarily blow up the way people thought they would originally. And I think it's because of so much out there to watch. If people are going to invest into something new, a lot of times it's something entirely new, not a spin-off of something they already like. They're just going to wait for that main piece of the continuity. So I think Star Wars needs to find whatever its core piece of TV is moving forward. And I think a lot of that will kind of depend on what the box office results of Mandalorian are. And so we'll talk about that question that Brandon sent in next. But I think ideally, if you had a Mandalorian per se on Disney Plus, you can make other things and take more risks, but you have that fallback. And whatever the future of streaming TV is, that's one thing that has lost people with Marvel, that something like Daredevil reawoke with those fans is a history, something to fall back on, and a previous love of something to get invested in rather than having to start over every single time. It's why the interest hasn't necessarily been there for newer, more one-off Marvel shows, but a Loki, a Daredevil have had repeat viewership. So I think Star Wars needs that as well. Going into Brandon's question, how much box office could The Mandalorian and Grogu do well in theaters compared to previous spin-offs like Rogue One and Solo? I think the low end, and this is fairly disastrous, but if you look at what the low end for a lot of major franchises like a Marvel have been post-COVID, the low end to me worldwide for Mandalorian and Grogu, and again, this would be terrible and they wouldn't probably make a sequel, would be 200 million worldwide. I think the high end to me would be I would be shocked if this movie makes over 600 to 700 million. I think that would be a huge success. Rumor is that this movie costs around 100 to 150 million to make. So if they made 400 million, it would be a profitable movie. And they would be really happy with that. They could have a fairly bankable thing to say, hey, with almost no marketing, with really no fanfare, and coming off of the worst season of The Mandalorian, we still had a profitable movie because we're able to tell this story in a manageable budget. I think you would see sequels to The Mandalorian and Grogu at 400 million. If it's 600, 700 million, now you'll see them double down on Mandalorian and Grogu. You're going to see them say, not only are we getting a sequel, but we're going to get one by 2028 or 2029. We're going to get no more TV Mandalorian. We're going to only get theatrical. We're going to probably get Mandalorian, New Republic era spinoffs. If this somehow cracked a billion, which I know some people are saying, I really just don't see it. It would have to be great, and it would have to have a way bigger opening weekend than I think most movies of this era have had, just purely based on when this movie is coming out. This movie comes out Memorial Day weekend, which should help boost it for a Friday or a Thursday and Monday box office, but it will make it more difficult to have legs because I believe Masters of the Universe comes out either the week after or 2 weeks after, and then you have Toy Story 5, and then you have Supergirl, and then you have Spider-Man. So it's just I don't see this movie still being in theaters come mid to end of July. And if it's not, then you got to make all your money in the first 3 weeks. And that means huge opening weekend. So it's kind of one of those movies that it's hard to see word of mouth keeping this movie or making this movie $1 billion movie. So you would need, which is kind of what it seems like this type of movie would need to rely on, right? Because it doesn't have the hype there that a normal Star Wars movie would. So it needs that that swell of support from people who are like, hey, go see this Mandalorian movie. And even if it gets that, there's still going to be so much competition. Does it really benefit from that fully? I don't know. So I think there's a lot of factors like that that make it, to me, like an absolute shock if this were to make $1 billion. But I think even still shocking to 700, 800 million. I think right now for Mandalorian and Grogu, optimistically, you'd be looking at 4 to 600, probably closer to 4. And low end would be about 200, which again would mean it loses money, but because the budget's lower, not too much money, and probably means it goes back to streaming. But we've seen stuff like Captain America making the 200-ish range last year. Thunderbolts, which had great reviews, was in the 200 to 300-ish range. Fantastic Four even was in the 3 or 400-ish range. So we've seen these movies, these high-profile movies, even that have succeeded with some fans, not do that well in today's world. And I think in my head, Mandalorian tracks a little more towards that side of the fandom, a side of the fandom that's Star Wars obsessive, maybe a side of the fandom that's a little bit more appealing to younger audiences, but not necessarily a side of the fandom that's like everybody's going to be there opening night, right? I don't know if I see that. And I think this movie needs to make 150 million opening weekend for it to have a shot at the 700 million plus range.
Yeah, I mean, don't disagree on any of those points. It's going to be very interesting how this plays out. the rumors of it, like you said, returning for a season 4 also really throws it up in the air. Like, is this something that now this successive season is dependent on, or if it does so well, does it negate it, or are these like a coexisting dual timeline of sorts where any movie that's in the Mandoverse is building to its bigger, larger story. Any show season that comes out for these shows is just to build out the world and the characters that can then populate the movies if needed be, or just be strangely like their own mini sub universe, right? I don't know. I mean, that's the big question now. But yeah, I don't I personally wanna say just from the hype that I'm seeing from kids, that's gonna carry it a good while forward, and I wanna say it's gonna make 500. I'm pretty optimistic about 500. Anything past that, I think it's just you're making big bucks and you're a real movie. But yeah, I mean, this is such a weird project, right? It wasn't on the original timelines of anything, wasn't any investor calls, and now it just shows up, and it's like even success for it will change how Lucasfilm will handle Metaverse for better or for worse, right? Like I said, for better, does that mean we get this season and another movie? And now Mando maybe he's not as big of a character, and maybe Ahsoka is or something, or is he getting his own movie universe and TV universe? The closest thing that, and I have been repeatedly connecting it to is Star Trek movies, right? And when Next Generation was coming out, they just dressed up the sets to make them look older, like 50, 60 years prior for the original series actors for the age that they were at. And then once that show ended in 94, 96 was the first proper Star Trek film for Next Generation, but that show had already ended. You can say Generations kind of is like a tweener of sorts, but still not really a thing there, right? I I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it because if this movie does succeed and then we still get a season 4, it does something that not even Star Trek attempted to do, which is to have 2 things happen concurrently and not upgrading to movies or switching a medium. It's like jumping back and forth, back and forth. Is that something that people necessarily want? I don't know. That's like, that could be its own confusing thing there, but, let things come as they come, right? So, I will say I'm optimistic about this movie. I think the teaser did far better offline than it did online. And if the Super Bowl trailer does well online and then also captures the same people who were already hyped about it, plus the people who like us who are been legacy fans for so long and are trying to see like big reasons to tell their friends to join besides just saying a Star Wars movie is coming, then yeah, then I think we're on the right track. But this being a conversion from streaming to TV as a franchise and how it can go back and forth, maybe handle both. It just it's throwing me for a loop a little bit, but I'm hoping it's a big success because I just want, even if this is not like the most glorious or innovative Star Wars film, to just be a solid hit, a really really solid hit that people like and the box office likes, and from there, you only have possibilities that are hopefully, better for the fandom as a whole, better for us Star Wars fans, and aren't decisions that have to be made like we've seen with Acolyte, where it's like it's not doing well, it's not matching the budget to watch rate and stuff like that. I'd rather us be in a position where it's like, hey, we're in a position now to do bigger and better and more creative choices and riskier choices than we have with our mediums, with our formats, with our storytelling, because this film did even better than we expected.
Yeah, and I think those are all good points. I think obviously we're speaking from still a pre-Super Bowl, hopefully trailer look at Mandalorian and Grogu, and it just doesn't. There are so many factors that I think dramatically change whether this movie does well opening weekend. I think number one opening weekend factor is how great is it and how terrible is it. If it's great or terrible, it will do well opening weekend. If it's terrible, it won't do well after. If it's great, it could still do well after. Uh, the other thing is if it's just okay, I think it will have to fully rely on word of mouth. If this is a movie that's 65% on Rotten Tomatoes, you're going to have to rely on word of mouth, and that's going to be very difficult where they've placed this movie in the release calendar. So I just think this one is really an interesting experiment. Specifically in your question in regards to Rogue One and Solo, it's going to get nowhere near Rogue One because Rogue One was over $1 billion movie. In regards to Solo, it could get around Solo, but Solo made more money than it feels like. It just didn't make a lot for the fact that it came out in a period where Star Wars had 5 or 4 billion-dollar movies in 5 years. So that's why Solo felt like the outlier. If Solo came out today, they'd be pretty happy with the box office of Solo, other than the fact that they paid for the movie twice. That's the main reason it underperformed for them, because they needed it to make $1 billion to be successful, for it to really make a good amount of profit for them. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that one specifically. Last question, I think we're going to have to wrap up here. We had Critical Thinker who said, how much do you think will realistically stay the same or change with Filoni in charge now? Do you think he's got plans for the bigger stuff outside of Rebels, Ahsoka, Mandalorian spinoffs, or will mostly acquiesce to the execs? Do you think he can handle being a Feige type? My concern is that because the Kennedy to Filoni transition was in the pipeline for so long, nothing will change. Well, I think you're already seeing things change. Obviously, um, their new slate is a complete experiment. And what we just talked about with the way how Kathleen Kennedy said they're prioritizing the trilogy, which we can assume might be 10, 11, 12. Prioritization of that, the prioritization of a future for Star Wars beyond episode 9, not ending it there, letting Star Wars be an ever flowing and ever changing franchise is already a huge step in a different direction from where Kathleen Kennedy supposedly had it. Even if she was on board with getting it going in this direction, if you want to say the transition was in the pipeline, you would have to imagine that, and from the news, we know that a lot of these ideas started to form once Dave Filoni was hired as CCO, right? So that can't be understated, that maybe his influence and maybe his creative suggestion was part of these changes that have now been in the pipeline, and we are still going to start seeing take effect in 27, 28, 29 here in the future. Um, I think it's also kind of a positive sign that if Filoni's movie's on the back burner and he's president of Lucasfilm, he has at least the long-term health of Star Wars in mind. And he's not like, no, we're going to do my movie and then we'll figure it out. Like, he is willing to step aside to let the long-term longevity and revitalization of Star Wars, at least with what they think will help that brand, come here in the future. So I think you're already starting to see it. So I wouldn't say because Filoni was an internal hire and might have been groomed to replace Kathleen Kennedy means that he won't change the direction. I mean, if you want to just look at Disney, for example, you would have thought Bob Chapek and Bob Iger would have been on the same page in terms of his chosen successor. And then the company, granted, again, pandemic, but company went completely in a different direction to the point where he had to come back and fire his own chosen successor as chairman of the board. He had to fire his own chosen successor, CEO, and step in himself and lead the company again for another 4 years. So there are, once the president comes in charge, you can see massive change. So I do think you will see at least a change in direction and change of priority, and you're going to start seeing that already. I think it's starting 2027 with Filoni. As for being a Kevin Feige type, I don't know if that's Star Wars's priority right now. I think their priority is just reclaiming brand interest and reclaiming fan excitement. Once they get that, they can worry about spin-offs and crossovers and all that type of stuff, and maintaining a universe. But I do think Filoni has plenty of experience overseeing long form storytelling, which I think makes him suited to this style. Has he overseen film production, live action film production? No. And I think that will make it a question until we see his first movies that have come out of him being president. But once we get in this direction, I think we'll see where their chosen path will be interesting and exciting enough of a change for Star Wars fans rather than what people feel right now. But we are seeing Star Wars change a lot, even if it doesn't feel like it, because we haven't yet gotten the content.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The only thing I'd add is, like, it's not just, like, Filoni, Feige one-to-one, it's Lenwyn Brennan. It's gonna be closer to what we saw with Gunn and Safran, and that's only just starting, right? So, it's not like there aren't gonna be some checks and balances. I'm pretty confident in what he's gonna do because, like you said, it's an internal hire. Some of this is gonna be already influenced by him being CCO for a while and him already being an active live action filmmaker, if not necessarily films. So, I mean, on the flip side, critical thinker, you could say, like, okay, what if Mando and Starfighter are big hits, right? Do we then say that's more attributed to what we have from Kathleen, right? I don't think anybody's necessarily going to do the half glass full sort of there and be like, oh, these are Kathleen's great final end products. They'd be more willing to give it to Linwin and more willing to give it to Filoni in that sense, right? So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Eh, yeah, sure. Gun's a movie guy who writes movie scripts, but he's not somebody who, you know, creates full cinematic franchises before. The only thing he did for Marvel was Guardians of the Galaxy, which were C, D level tier characters that ended up being really good. Right? We have no guarantee that the DCU is going to be great in projects that are outside of his movie scripts, like Lanterns, like Mr. Miracle, and all this stuff. Right? So you're saying that. I'm not trying to disagree with you, but that I don't know. That seems a little quick on that there because, again, I'm saying that the only comparable situation is also unfolding. So, I think we are back here. I think it dropped for a second again. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Final
Well,
point,
we're
just,
wrapping.
it's unfolding. We'll see how it unfolds because we can't talk more about something that none of us 3 really can say because that's the future.
Well, and I think too, I mean, technically, Dave Filoni has more experience at the executive level than James Gunn did. So even if Dave Filoni comes from a animation background, Dave Filoni was still in charge of Lucasfilm Animation as an executive. He still served his time as CCO for 2 years prior to becoming the president. So he's had way more, even if only by a few years, way more executive experience than James Gunn had prior to his hire. So in some ways, you could look at that as a plus, right? Ultimately, being the president versus being CCO versus being a producer versus being a writer or whatever, it's a much more intensive job as proof by Kathleen Kennedy, right? I mean, one of the great producers of all time, one of the most accomplished producers of all time, and yet struggled as president in a lot of different periods with the changing landscape because you have to continue to adapt a company to the continuing changing landscape of film and TV. And over Kathleen Kennedy's time, we saw the birth of streaming, we saw the change in streaming, we saw a pandemic, we saw an era of requels to an era of embracing the future, right? There were so many adapts things to adapt and change during her time. Filoni's going to have the same struggles. It's almost impossible to actually be prepared for that position, right? I mean, you can't be. You just hope that the passion and the love and the excitement and the willingness to adapt are there enough to mold the Star Wars franchise into a place that we can be happy about in 10 years, just like we hope to be in the end of 2027 when all things are considered for this kind of reboot of Star Wars. That's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's live Q&A. Hope to see you all next week. If you're new, make sure you subscribe. If you haven't yet liked the video, please do so. It really does help us out. Just scroll down, hit that like button. Also, make sure you check out our other content. We did just post today a review of the latest Star Wars book, Outlaws Low Red Moon. It's spoiler free. So if you're interested in hearing our thoughts on whether you should read the book or not, make sure you check out our review. If you're interested in Star Wars Legends, last week I posted the seventh episode of the Legends Guide, The Empire Strikes Back, part of the Rebellion timeline. There are 3 more episodes coming out of that series. I've committed to trying to get them done here in the first half of the year. So I'm hoping to get one out about every other week to every 2 weeks or so. Make sure you check that episode out. Again, take a long time to make. So if you're interested at all, hit the like button and watch that video if you want to see the rest of them. What else do we have? We have shorts coming out 3 days a week. We have polls twice a day, every day, all the usual stuff here on Star Wars Lads. So thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. Hope to see you all next week to talk about news and take your guys' questions. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you all next week.